Hi, everyone. My name is Matan Azanov. I'm a VC, which means my job is to go out there and find some of the most exceptional entrepreneurs out there. And today I'm speaking with one of them, Europa Stein, who started Hyre. Now, VCs talk a lot about how they find the best companies and how they evaluate the best entrepreneurs. And one characteristic that comes up all the time is something called grit. And Europa, if she has anything, it's a lot of grit. And today we're going to learn about her story and what happened when her entire industry went from growing very quickly to zero. And what did she do, not only to survive, but to thrive? So, Europa, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
We'd love to learn about your story. So tell us a little bit about your background and the business you started, Hyre.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I decided to do an undergrad and a master's in psychology rather than business because I always thought I could find something along the way that I'd be extremely passionate about and want to change. And that's exactly what happened. I found, while working at a consulting firm, I found a big problem that I wanted to solve. And it was within the staffing industry, specifically temp workers, and making the whole process of finding workers and placing them a lot easier for staffing firms. I was really passionate about that industry because I do think that there's just so much that can still be improved upon. And
so let me understand. Okay, so you started this basically like a labor marketplace for temp staff, right?
Yes.
So that kind of idea has been around for quite a long time. Like, what did you figure out that nobody else didn't? Because what you're doing essentially is putting together people that need staff. Let's say specifically you're targeting like hotels and events and things like that, right?
Yeah.
With people that need work, essentially.
Yes.
But what did you figure out that was so unique that you can really improve upon?
So at the time when I was first getting into the industry, I realized that the staffing agencies that I was working with were using at best Excel. And therefore, the labor was quite expensive in terms of the admin around managing the labor. And they were charging an arm and a leg to their clients. And the quality wasn't the best because you can't really monitor the ebb and flow of like what's happening between the workers working on the shift and then the clients complaining and everything. So there's no
feedback loop essentially.
There
right?
was no feedback loop whatsoever. They tried, but good luck with an Excel that has like thousands of names on it and trying to get every single person to then put their feedback on how that person did and then following up on that and not sending them back to the same employer. That was almost impossible. So there wasn't any technology that could just like take all of that admin work and make it concise and make it so that the quality would improve. So I started with, like you said, a marketplace that would take that workflow and just make it a lot more efficient.
And digitized. Yeah, it's very interesting because I remember when we were doing our diligence, we've looked at a bunch of different marketplaces and specifically labor marketplaces. One of the things I loved about the hotel and event vertical is that by their very nature, these are cyclical and seasonal businesses. So a hotel that's doing their job, they're not going to hire for peak season, right? Mm-hmm. They're hiring for, I guess, I don't know, maybe the average amount of work they need over the course of the year.
Yep.
So by necessity, they need temporary staff for peak seasons.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, well, so great. So they're staffing firms. I was shocked that there's such a big industry when we were looking into it and how archaic it was. Like you just said, they use basically Excel to manage thousands of staff. It's crazy.
At best.
So we saw your system like, okay, well, this is clearly a step improvement, right? Where you can just go on your labor marketplace and click, hey, I need X amount of temporary staff for this shift. And you can choose by rating and you can choose by their certifications, which I thought was very clever. It's very simple solutions that just weren't done effectively until then.
Yes.
So how did you figure that out?
Well, I was working at a consulting firm within, and one of the projects was at a staffing firm, and I was there for over a year. I learned the industry inside and out. I was interviewing people, I was placing them, I was trying to find a better way to help them manage their workflow, but the best I had was Excel. So it was just torturous.
Yeah, I mean, I get very skeptical when I hear companies that say, hey, we're going to replace Excel.
Yeah.
In this case, it was actually a good replacement of Excel.
Yes.
So that's great. And were you always an entrepreneur? Like, is this something you wanted to? Because it takes a lot of courage. Did you ever consider just getting a job, or were you always like, listen, I'm going to start a business and become, whatever, billionaire or whatever?
I think that looking back, I wish I did get a job for a little bit, but no, I always was very, very adamant on starting my own thing when the time was right and when I was passionate about something. And I mean, luckily, I found something I was passionate about pretty early on. I guess working at the consulting firm was a job, and that was the extent of my employment. But I think I'm pretty content with taking, the status quo and shaking it up here and there.
That's great. One thing I found very interesting when we invested, obviously, was that you were growing pretty quickly. It was a clever product, great team, kind of everything you want in a good venture investment. And of course, you were great, and we had a lot of confidence in your ability to lead this thing into something very significant. And not 3 months after we closed the deal, the WHO declared COVID as a global pandemic. And what that meant was that your industry went to essentially zero overnight. Mm-hmm. Again, I remember, I've said this publicly quite a lot. I remember going, January, February, going in the elevator in my building and seeing the news reports of this many cases of COVID. And you think you're in a movie a little bit. You don't know how it's going to impact you directly. Thank God for me, it wasn't so bad. But your industry went to zero overnight.
Yes, it did.
When did you first learn about COVID and how it would impact your industry? When did you first see, this is going to be a big problem for us?
I mean, hearing about COVID back in December 2019, but really understanding that it would be an issue for us was around end of February, when our customers started canceling a lot of orders. And then obviously the shock really hit March 13th. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars of orders, and literally overnight, within 48 hours, I guess, it went to zero. So every order was just canceled, and we could just, hear the crickets.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I remember that too, because that was pretty
I thought you were going to take back the money.
Yeah. No, we never do that. But it's interesting because if we would have encountered the company after that period, obviously it would be difficult to invest because the company would have zero revenue, right?
Yeah.
But I was pretty confident that you'd figure it out. But there was a lot of questions, right? What did you first do when that happened? What was your decisions? What did you figure? You have staff, you can't just fire people because that would have been very disruptive. You would essentially be canceling your business at that point, right? Because your business is your staff.
Yep.
Your employees, I should say, not the people on the marketplace.
Yeah.
What was your first set of decisions and how did you make them?
Well, one thing you have to understand is that the state of mind that I was in was, there were a lot of unknowns. No one knew how long this would last. So how are you going to make a decision not knowing how long something would actually last? Had I known it was going to last a year or even more, I might have cut down the team. But not knowing anything, I decided to stop the hiring process because we did have a few candidates we just raised that we were about to hire. So at least stop that, and decided to really take a second, look at other industries that might be needing temp workers and maybe approach them a little bit temporarily until we could stabilize and then go back to the event staffing industry. So that's what we did. But at the same time, as you know, we also decided to move forward with phase 2 of our business plan, which was really building out a staffing software specifically aimed at scheduling for the staffing agencies. So instead of just the temp marketplace that we had.
Right. So that was one of the interesting things for us because we largely invest in software business, enterprise software businesses, and you were a marketplace, which was a bit outside of what we typically do. But one of the things that attracted us to it was how can you add different software layers on top of the marketplace to make everything more sticky, which I think we'll get into. But even before getting into that, I want to talk to the people watching. I'm involved in a lot of businesses, and almost everyone was negatively impacted by the government restrictions related to COVID, which is natural. And, not even going to talk about the government response, but certainly impacted businesses. And it's very easy to understand why it would impact businesses negatively. Europa was one of the few companies, despite her industry going to zero, where she was able to increase staff and maintain almost zero cash burn, which even in startup land, zero cash burn in the best of times, while growing your business, while growing your team, is almost impossible. Europa not only was able to grow her business during this time, she was able to increase her staff while her industry went to zero. So that's really what I want to focus on, is like, how did you do that? I have a little bit of insight because obviously I'm involved.
Yeah.
But go for it.
So we essentially changed a lot of roles within the company. Anyone that was in operations was both in sales and operations. And we had a mandate to look for other industries that we could potentially tackle. And long-term care centers obviously were very highly impacted by COVID. They also needed a huge influx of temp workers. We had a lot of hospitality workers that were looking for gigs, and they could double up as maybe some general labor within that space. So that's what we did. We just picked up the phones and got those new vendors. They were a little bit more stable in terms of the revenue. We decided to take that on to help balance our books. And then we took on a little bit of the CEWS money that we had, and that helped with cash burn as well.
That's great. So what I'm hearing is that, number one, you pivoted to an industry that was still active, like healthcare,
Yes.
right? Long-term care homes, which I want to get into. But the second thing is you were able to get a lot of government grants, but even the government grants weren't enough to sustain your business, because your cash burn was as if you were operating in normal times. And while you did cut some staff, I remember, it wasn't because of the government restrictions. Those are people that just weren't a good fit at the time. And then you hired people to replace them.
Yes.
And eventually your team size increased. So I want to understand, like, how did you approach your budget? Like, where did I'm even still stunned. Like, I can look back at the numbers and the emails. I'm like, I'm still shocked that the cash burn is almost zero, even till today. And throughout this entire period, like, what did you do to maintain that kind of budget?
I think that the government grants covered about 40 to 50% of the burn, and we made up the rest through the new revenue that we had coming in from long-term care centers. And that revenue was just a little bit more stable than our traditional revenue, because it was constant orders that were just happening. The same people would be taking those orders. There was a little bit less maintenance. So the costs, like the actual cost of the business, went down a bit, and we put a lot of focus on R&D, and we supplemented it with other grants that were just R&D focused, because we built that whole new platform.
So this was like a soft pivot, I would say, to a different industry.
Yeah. So it was a temporary focus to a different industry, knowing that we wanted to use our resources wisely, but not fully pivot, because there are other companies that fully pivoted to healthcare and then they hired nurses. That would highly increase costs, because now interviewing for nurses and PSWs is just a different field. We didn't have that knowledge base, nor did we want to tackle that. So we just used the temp workers that we did have on the platform and placed them where we knew that they could handle the workload.
Right, which helped those people quite a lot, because they didn't have any income anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. And your platform was designed, as far as I remember, pretty flexible, that you could have added the healthcare industry without too much disruption, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a theme I see with companies that can adapt very quickly, is that their platforms are designed, their systems are designed in such a way that they can go to an adjacent market without too much disruption to their core tech or how they function, which is pretty interesting, which is a note for all the people in startup land out there, take note, I guess. And one thing that was pretty amazing, it wasn't just that you were able to have this, what I would call a soft pivot to a different vertical for a temporary period of time. It was that you're also focusing a lot on R&D, so that by the time things got back to normal, which was 2 years later or something,
minimum,
you actually start to sell software. You actually took this time to go to stage 2 in your business plan, like you just said. So how did you do that? How were you able to do that during this time, while again maintaining the budget?
Investing in R&D allowed us to really take on the new business. Right now, obviously, we supply a lot of staffing firms with software, including software that helps run the Oscars, Coachella, the Grammys. So huge events in the States that need to manage thousands and thousands of workers at the same time. We're able to help them do that, and we would not have been able to had we not had that COVID malfunction, I would say, because that really allowed us to just like dive really deep into R&D, interview as many staffing firms as we could, get them even to pilot it for free during the time where they didn't really need anything. So we made those relationships very strong at the time. And then post-COVID, it kind of really transpired into something that I'm very proud of.
Right. And right now you're selling software in addition to the staffing marketplace, which is really cool. We're not going to talk about specific revenue numbers right now, unless you want to, but probably leave that off for now. But actually selling software, have SaaS revenue, which is fantastic. And in my world, SaaS is like, the best kind of revenue you can have. Tell us about this new product. Like, how does it fit within the labor marketplace, for example?
Yeah, so the main focus of it would be to help the staffing agencies manage their workforce. And so that they go on, they use it like a scheduling platform. And then when they want to connect to extra labor, they can connect to another staffing firm that's also on the platform or connect to our temp labor force as well. So if they're in Ontario, for example, which we do have some catering companies that use us in Ontario, they will also connect to the temp labor force. And if they're in the States, they connect to other vendors on our platform. So it's a vendor management marketplace kind of software.
That's great. And I thought it was brilliant. So that's great.
I think it really allows us to scale up in a way that makes sense. Like, I think that a marketplace is great. They're very hard to start. And there are a lot of things that just come and kind of ruffle the way forward all the time. Like right now, obviously we're going through a recession. So who's to say that if we were only a marketplace, could we survive this second kind of wind? I know a lot of other marketplaces that have had to shut down, not from COVID, but from this period. And luckily we're not at that state, because right now we're running our marketplace on almost no burn. And the majority of our resources are for our software, which is growing.
That's great. If you can give yourself an assessment of how you did as a CEO during this period, what would you say? Like, would you change, maybe I'll ask it this way, would you change anything?
I would change everything, but
Really?
I'm very critical about myself. So
Okay. What's one thing you would change about your response?
I think I would, at different points of COVID, I guess, if we're talking about COVID, the COVID period, I would be more headstrong about my certain decisions that I made and maybe not wait a week or two to go forward. Eventually I did make the right decision, but I think that because of all the ambiguity, it was very difficult to fully jump in sometimes. And also my mental state wasn't the best in the beginning. So it was very difficult, going through that, not knowing what's going to happen and how everyone's going to react, and also being able to not show that part of you to everyone, because you had to, be the CEO that's like, yeah, everything's great, motivation and everything. I would probably just be a little bit more upfront with everyone about what was happening in the beginning. But I quickly changed my tune around June. So.
Yeah, I remember that when we were planning, when everything was going down, we're thinking, okay, by summer things will get back to normal, and we can get back to growth mode. Yeah. And boy, were we wrong about that, I guess. So
I remember those conversations.
yeah, that was quite interesting. What would you say to founders today that are struggling with their own? Every founder is struggling with their own similar challenges. Every industry has their own peculiarities, and every founder has their own specific challenges. What would you say to a founder out there that's struggling either to raise money, to hire the right people, to grow their business? What would you say to them?
I would say that they should run mini experiments as if they had nothing. test that out, and try to strip all the layers of like the funding that they got previously, what they have currently, and just go back to the basic MVP model, run it like a scrappy startup, and then build up on that again and again. And I think that when you lose sight of the fact that you are a startup and you have to hustle, that's when like the issues happen. You get too comfortable in just, the day-to-day kind of lifestyle. It's just what I found when the issues happen.
Right. And what about fundraising? What kind of advice would you give to founders fundraising, and what is a difficult fundraising environment? I think, 50% of the amount of dollars going into venture capital investments have reduced by something like 50% in North America. Mm-hmm. So that just means less people are getting funded.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give them?
Honestly, I would tell them to ask themselves, like, do they actually have to fundraise? Can they do something else in their business that would allow them to use their resources more wisely and just kind of stretch the resources that they have right now to a later date? Look at government grants, look at debt financing, look at anything else that could potentially cushion their financial plan for the next 12 months. And if they have to fundraise, try to fundraise just a little, just enough to get you to the next phase to prove your numbers yourself and the model a little bit more before going right into it. I think fundraising in the startup world has just become a badge of honor, where it really shouldn't be that, because you're running a business. This isn't like a competition that you're kind of trying. Well, of course you're winning against competition, but this is more like you're trying to run a profitable business eventually, not.
Oh, we don't say profit.
So you're trying to run a growing business.
There you go. I'm joking. Profitability is becoming, fun again.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's funny because I've been on record saying that there's kind of two people I come across. I think we see about 5,000 different companies a year and speak to about 500 or so. And there's two types of entrepreneurs we come across. They're what I've labeled as startup builders and business builders. Someone who's starting a startup, so to speak, is the type of person that's doing it to create a unicorn. They just that's kind of their end goal. Whereas a business builder, someone that wants to build a great business. And it looks very similar like if you're just looking from the outside, it will look very similar, and you have to get to the heart of what this person's motivations are. And I think you're a business builder because you just care about building a great business. And of course, with that will come the growth and becoming a unicorn and all that stuff, maybe. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad you pointed out that, hey, just do whatever you need to build a good business.
Especially now, though, in today's time, like I don't think it makes sense to run after fundraising that might you'd be spinning your wheels for months. Whereas like just invest that time, grow your business, prove out your model, get the numbers, and then you'll be able to raise.
That's right. Exactly. And I think that's what we would encourage as well. If you have a great business, people will invest. Yes. But if you're trying to force a narrative onto a story that maybe is not the best, people will notice.
Exactly.
Right? And one of the things I always encourage entrepreneurs is, listen, you got to show your own conviction in your startup, which means don't go to venture capitalists unless you absolutely have to. And I think we've had that discussion several times, like, hey, do we need to go out to the market and raise more money? Thank God you have enough cash in the bank. You don't need to do that right now. But that is something that's because, again, she's managed her budget very well and all the things we talked about. How would you say you've stayed? You mentioned earlier on that you weren't in the best mindset, the first few months, in 2020. How did you stay level-headed, and how did you get out of that? I guess you said around June 2020. Mm-hmm. How did you get out of that mindset, and how did you stay positive thereafter?
I realized that this was something that I would have, like the situation was something that might not change, and I didn't have any control over what was happening. So I took control over things I could control, which was my physical kind of mental health through physical, like working out, spending time with my family, my dog, and realizing that I could maybe impact other parts of the business that would then be beneficial post-COVID, which was obviously building that new software, but even doing fun projects like SEO. I learned a lot about SEO. I'm very proud of some experiments that are still today getting us sales on a weekly basis that didn't have much of an investment, but we spent time doing it, and it worked out really well. And those were like little wins that got me out of that mental state.
That's great. I want to touch on something you mentioned when you were building the software piece of, I guess, the SaaS piece of your business, because I think this would be helpful for a lot of people listening who are running a business and trying to grow. A marketplace is a very different type of business than a SaaS business. Even though to have a marketplace, you have to have software, right? You have to build software to run that digital marketplace, right? But it's a very different type of business,
Yes.
Very different type of sales, very different type of mentality. Yeah, so how did you change your focus or the team's focus from a marketplace to software? And what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome to do that?
I think that the focus to change like to a SaaS product instead of a marketplace in terms of the team, it was more from the technical team, because when you're building a marketplace, it's a reaction to what you need, what the operations team needs. And so we had to divide the technical team and kind of really manage the resources properly and say, okay, we're going to be, this percentage of your time is going to be fixing like bugs on the marketplace and like minor improvements on the operations of the marketplace. But we really do need to focus on the feature building that our SaaS clients really need to operate their business. And so that was a big one. And the operations team got a lot more autonomy to run that business on their own and take ownership of just managing the marketplace so that we could have the headspace to kind of go forward with the SaaS platform, which, like you said, is very different. It's the customer relationship is also extremely different. A little bit more hands-off after you get the customer, which is great. I love that. But the relationship with the customer is very much needed still.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is in terms of the software piece of it, because again, this is a challenge I've seen with so many other people. Let's say in the sales side of things, because selling to, let's say, a hotel, right? Selling them on the labor marketplace, they don't have to make much of a commitment up front, whereas software is a little bit different. They have to maybe implement it, maybe retrain. What do you do on the sales team or on the sales side of things to sell software as opposed to the marketplace?
So my approach to selling is very much like the consultant-based sales approach, which I love because I personally love to learn about businesses. Me and whoever was helping me sell, we would go in and we would actively like work with them for maybe a week or two and be a part of their business and understand it so intimately that when we were speaking to the higher ups or anyone involved, it was us speaking from a part of their team, and it wasn't us and them. It was we are going to, like, the customer became part of us and we became part of them. And it wasn't a sale at the end of the day. It was just like, let's make our business more efficient, and our business was theirs and vice versa. So that's kind of what I do. And we did focus on more enterprise. So yes, the sales cycle is longer, but it was worth it.
Are there any resources that, books or resources that you can share with people in terms of what you would listen to that have helped you throughout this journey?
I love How I Built This. I think it's so inspirational. It's one of my favorite podcasts. There was a point in time where I just listened to every single episode and then didn't have any more to listen to. So I started looking further. There are others.
Just to clarify, it's called How I Built This.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I listened to that too.
Have you heard it? Yeah,
great,
it's amazing. I really like it. It's very inspirational.
Too many ads, but it's
a lot of ads, yes, of course. But it really puts things in perspective. Like, you look at big companies and you think, oh, overnight success. But no, these founders, like, this was like maybe their 7th, 8th startup. And one was just a variation of the other until they finally got it. So it's just put life in perspective, understand that everything's like a bumpy road and your journey isn't the same as someone else's.
Right. Yeah, that's a great one. What are you excited about for the future with Hyre and yourself?
I'm excited of the potential of the new business plan that we have that is just, in my opinion, going to really, really help the customers that we are trying to help. I really want to make a huge impact in the space, and I think that this is the best way to do it. So I can't reveal everything that's going to be happening in the future, but I think that what we're doing hasn't been done before, and I'm excited to try my best and do it.
Yeah, and we're excited to join you in that ride. So thank you, Europa. I really appreciate speaking with you today.
Thank you. And thank you for all your support.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully we'll make a lot of money doing it too. So.
Yes.
Anyways, thanks everyone for listening.